Is it okay, Helene? Like this?
Yes, we can see
Yes.
it.
Thank
Or
you
at
very
least I
much.
can see it.
Okay, so please, during this meeting, reduce and mute your microphone. We are recording this first party because we have quite a lot of colleagues in Canada that wanted to join this meeting, but it's in the middle of the night. So we want to record it so they can look it back. If you don't want to be recorded, please mute your camera. And if there are any questions during this meeting, please put your question in the chat or put on your hands. So Helene, the project manager, will handle all that questions. So it's a party because it's the first meeting of this new association, and we are very proud of this meeting because we really want to bring together a multidisciplinary group of professionals with interest and expertise in a diversity of aspects of patients with persistent death wish and request for euthanasia on basis of mental disorder, including the perspectives of patients themselves and also the perspectives of their relatives. In our opinion, it's important to share legislation, clinical care, research from all countries because the sharing can provide valuable insights in the bright topic for each country with legislation concerning made for people with mental disorders, countries that are preparing legislation, and countries without legislation so far. But in all countries are people with mental disorders that are suffering and that are suffering unbearable without prospect of improvement. We know that there are only a few countries in the world where there's legislation for euthanasia, and those countries are unique in the world. As we look upon the legislation made for people with dementia, we can see there are only a few countries: Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Spain, Colombia, Canada, and in some way Switzerland. And the Netherlands are unique in this case because it's the only country where euthanasia is legal for people with advanced dementia on basis of the Advanced Euthanasia Directive that is written when people were still decisionally competent. If we look at the legislation made on psychiatric grounds, we can see that there's still no legislation for this group in Canada, although they are preparing already a lot of years. So where MAID is possible on somatic grounds, for example, in Portugal, this is not possible legal for the patients with a psychiatric disorder or on psychiatric grounds or for people with dementia. This is the program of today. I will do a short introduction on IAADM, and after that we have two excellent speakers from the Netherlands this time, Arne van der Bos and Lisanne Swera. I will introduce them later on. IAADM was founded in 2024. We prepared it, I think, for 2 years. It was quite a difficult process. It is a co-production, Flemish-Dutch co-production, and Kenneth Chambrere and Monica van Hostet joined the board from Belgium, and Richard and myself from the Netherlands. Unfortunately, Monica van Hofstad decided to stop her excellent research work in this kind of field as a clinical psychologist just after the establishment of IAADM. So now the executive board is composed of 3 men, Kenneth, Richard, and myself. And this board cannot function without an excellent young project manager, Helene van den Berg, and without her it was not possible to organize this first meeting at all. So we will introduce ourselves shortly. By ourselves, I will start the introduction. My name is Radboud Marijnissen. I'm a psychiatrist, an all-day psychiatrist from origin. And now I'm working as head of the head of the patient care in the University Center Psychiatry of the University Medical Center in Groningen. It's a town in the northern part of the Netherlands. And in my clinical work, in my education, in my research, I'm focusing on the end of life. Beside that, I'm the chair of the Euthanasia Committee of the Dutch Psychiatric Association. I'm the chair of TANET, that's a network in the Netherlands for persistent wishes to die, and euthanasia request. I'm also member of the board because I'm also interested, of course, in palliative care for people with a mental disorder. I'm also a member of the board of Psyval Plus. That's a network in the Netherlands for palliative care for people with a psychiatric disorder and addiction. So quite involved in the complex and very interesting aspects of end of life of people with a mental disorder. Now I will ask Kenneth to introduce himself shortly.
Yes, thank you, and good morning, good afternoon to everyone. So I'm Kenneth Chambare from Belgium. I'm associate professor at the End of Life Care Research Group, which is an alliance research group between Ghent University and Vrije Universiteit Brussels, so Brussels University. I am not a clinician by background. My background is in sociology, and I've been active in palliative care and end-of-life care research for now almost 20 years already, and also a lot around end-of-life decision-making, various topics within that bracket, and many of them also relate to assisted dying. So we've done projects, we've done research in terms of monitoring the prevalence of assisted dying in Belgium and also internationally, also analysis of practice characteristics in terms of its evolutions. Also a lot of experience-based research with patients, families, care professionals. We've also done analyses of the regulatory space around assisted dying. We're diving now also into research on the relationship between palliative care and assisted dying, which is also quite a hot topic, let's say, in the international debate. I'm also involved in the development of a needs-based practice guideline. And yes, many of you will also know the research of Monica Verhofstadt, for whom I was the promoter. So that's kind of my link now with euthanasia or assisted dying in psychiatry. I'm also a member of the Flemish Working Group on Palliative Care and Psychiatry from the Flemish Federation for Palliative Care. And yes, so we also developed or we also co-edited a handbook in Dutch, so it's not in English, on end of life in psychiatry. So that's my link with this topic, and welcome also from me.
Thank you very much, Kenneth. As you can see, Kenneth is the Vice President and Secretary of the IAADM. So, Richard, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Richard Oude-Vosnaer. I'm the treasurer of the IAADM, and I have a lot of trainings had in my life, but not as a treasurer. So this is a really challenge for me, but I like to do it. In my professional background, I'm trained as a psychiatrist, and since 2012, I'm a professor of geriatric psychiatry at the University Medical Center in Groningen. And my primary research interest is in affective disorders, depressive disorders, anxiety, and somatic symptom disorders. But I'm particularly interested in the interaction with cognitive aging and physical aging. And so in that, from that perspective, I become more and more interested in the final stages of life, especially in the case of mental disorders. And in 2015, I was confronted with a patient who asked for euthanasia. My what was not willing to do principle problems with euthanasia, and I tried to take over.
Sorry, Richard, your sound is not excellent for me.
The problem, because I can't see from here.
Is heel brokkelig.
Yes, heel brokkelig. That's Dutch. Yes. Okay. And now the camera is all frozen. So we continue. We'll come back later to Richard. So now we'll go to our project manager, Helene. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, thank you. So I'm Helene. I'm still a student. I study health sciences in Maastricht, and I'm doing the mental health track. So I'm studying to become a psychologist myself. Hopefully next year I'll do the master clinical psychology, and I'll start working in the field in a year and a half. Yeah, my wishes are to work in addiction care or in forensic care, but I started working at the University Center of Psychiatry in Groningen, and there I met Richard and Radboud, and yeah, now I'm helping them with this very interesting and important project. So yeah, that's a new environment for me to work in as well, but it's very very fun to do so far, and I'm looking forward to what it will bring to us.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Helene, back to Richard.
Yes,
Richard?
I hope everybody can understand me now.
Yeah.
I do it now from another line, but it's
Okay.
a mobile line, so I hope it will not fail. Happy to get a second chance. As I said, I'm a professor of geriatric psychiatry.
Yeah.
Do my research in affective disorders, especially in relationship to cognitive aging and physical aging. So it attracted me more and more to the later stages in life. And as I was telling just before I was turned down, in 2015, I've performed a euthanasia on a patient with a psychiatric disorder. It was the first time for me. And in total, I have done it 5 times. So there's not many often, but I'm prepared and willing to do it. And in addition, into my clinical work as psychiatrist, I'm also a scan physician, and that stands for support and consultation of euthanasia in the Netherlands. It's part of our procedure. So that's my experience with euthanasia. And together with Radboud and also Kenneth, I do some research projects now also on euthanasia in later life. For me, it's still a complex issue. I am convinced that mental health can lead to very severe suffering. And I think, from my opinion, it is good that euthanasia is a possibility. If you look at the clinical part of it, I'm sometimes struggling that patients who ask it, it's difficult to see and feel why they ask it, why you see people with very severe mental disorders who never ask about it or think about it. So that complexity is really triggering me and also interests me. And I hope that with the IAADM we can get more knowledge about a good policy of euthanasia in different countries, and we can stimulate it in a good way throughout the world. So thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Very good. So this is the executive board, and we are planning willing to install an advisory board composed of a representative of each country, a professional representative, and also in advisory board we want representatives from patient perspective and relative perspectives. In our opinion, it's important to install an advisory board to, in the first place, to expand the network, to provide input, critical questions, advices on the proposed plans and ideas of the executive board. Of course, we want introduction of new ideas of our members, and the members of the advisory board can play an active role in one or more activities, but also the members of the network in future can play an active role in developing new ideas. So we invite you, if you are interested to be a member of the advisory board from your own country, please mail us at info@iaadm.org. the IAADM, we hope to foster international multidisciplinary collaboration in education, research, and clinical care regarding MAID for individuals with mental disorders to support clinical development and the ethical, legal, and societal debate. And in our vision, in mental health setting, persons requesting for MAID should be treated with the utmost seriousness by their professionals, but also by their relatives. And regardless of an eventual outcome of the MAID trajectory and the legal landscape in that country, an open discussion is greatly evaluated by these persons and also by their relatives. So in our opinion, MAID should be incorporated in the continuum of end-of-life care for those patients with mental disorders. So the psychiatric disorders and dementia. And in that continuum of rehabilitation for efforts and palliative care strategies, we should tailor it to the complex needs of these patients. IAADM is dedicated to 4 core pillars. The first one is enhancing care practices. So, for example, how MAID aligns with the introduction and development of palliative care in the psychiatric treatment, advancing research, fostering research in this domain, of course, promoting education and trainee initiatives all over the world, for specific countries, and engaging in societal research, so informing policy makers and contributing to the political and societal discussions and debates. The activities of IAADM are the network meetings. We are planning to do the network meetings 4 times a year. The first one is now 1.5 hours. We think that 1 hour fits better, but the content is one presentation about research in a country or clinical care of developments in education, and one presentation is from the representative of a country that tells us about the legislation, clinical care, and developments about MAID on psychiatric basis or on basis of dementia. Beside the network meetings, we are planning to introduce trainings and educations for the specific countries that are in the IAADM, and we are planning to have once in the 2 years an international symposium. The first symposium will take place in 2026 in Belgium. And of course, the network meetings and the symposia contain topics from care, research, education, and the societal and political debate in each country. So that's about the IAADM. So now we will continue to the presenters. But first of all, I want to ask you if there are any questions to the executive board about the IAADM. I only can see small things. Are there any questions in the chat, Helene?
Not that I can see yet.
No. Okay. So then we can continue with our first presenter from the Netherlands, Arne van der Bos. He's a medical student following his internships here in Groningen, and he started his PhD trajectory the 1st of March. But he has already a few publications, and this one is very unique and an awesome publication in the Journal of American Geriatric Society. He did already a presentation last year at the AAGP in Atlanta, but now we are honored to have him here as presenter about his research on decisional capacity assessment for euthanasia in dementia. So I will stop my presentation now. So Arne, the floor is yours, and you can share the presentation, I hope.
Yeah, we'll see if it works. Thank you for the introduction, Radboud. I have nothing to add to that. Can everybody see my presentation?
Yeah, but
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, okay, that's great. And now it's
But
in
I think
presenter mode,
yeah,
right?
this is better. Yeah, right. Thank
Okay,
you.
that's great. So as Radboud said, we did a paper together on capacity assessment for euthanasia in dementia, published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society, and I'll be presenting that paper briefly today. Some of my co-authors you might recognize from about 5 minutes ago, and Denise Hans also contributed to this paper. I have no potential or actual conflicts of interest to disclose in this case. So first, I'll briefly introduce the topic and focus on decisional capacity, which is the topic of interest. Then I'll share a research question. I'll talk a bit about the methods we use to answer this question. I'll share the results, the highlights of these results, which will be the main part of this presentation. Then we'll briefly visit some methodological considerations and end with a conclusion. So in the Netherlands, euthanasia is regulated or legislated through the Termination of Life on Request and Assisted Suicide Act. And this act specifies a number of criteria, due care criteria, to which a physician executing or performing euthanasia should adhere. And the first of these due care criteria is of interest to our presentation today. And this criterion states that the physician must be satisfied that the patient's request is voluntary and well considered. Those are the key words. So if we focus on the voluntariness, the regional euthanasia review committees have published a guideline on euthanasia called the Euthanasia Code, and they divide voluntariness into two components. They talk about external voluntariness and internal voluntariness. External voluntariness concerns the absence of undue influence from others in this decision to request euthanasia. And internal voluntariness is about decisional capacity. And as today we're interested in decisional capacity, that is the one we are interested in about. We are interested about today. So this same guideline, the Euthanasia Code, specifies 4 criteria to which a patient must conform in order to be decisionally competent. These criteria are based on the 4 criteria specified by Applebaum and Grisso in 1988. So first, the patient must be able to communicate intelligibly about their request for euthanasia. Secondly, they should be able to understand the relevant medical and other information about their situation and about their prognosis. They should be able to have insight into their condition, so they can assess their situation, the implications of euthanasia, and any alternative treatment. And lastly, they should be able to make it clear why they want euthanasia to be performed. So they should be able to motivate their request. It is also called they should be able to manipulate information rationally. So that was the guideline, but how is capacity actually assessed in practice? Well, in practice, in a number of studies that have been executed, it is found that not only these criteria are of relevance to capacity assessment. Besides that, there are many assessment tools. One review identified 29 different assessment tools of capacity with varying reliability. And while some of these tools had good inter-rater reliability, they differed from the clinical judgment of involved clinicians. So there has been some research done on this topic, the topic of the assessment of capacity. However, most of these studies center around treatment decisions rather than euthanasia. So, for example, admission into a hospital. And few of these studies center around dementia. Most of these studies are about people with psychiatric disorders. So this leaves a significant gap in the literature, which we aim to fill. By asking this question, which factors and how influence the judgment of decisional capacity in euthanasia cases with dementia? So how did we go about answering this question? Well, we looked at case summaries published by the regional euthanasia review committees These summaries were published between 2012, when they started publishing them, and 2021, which was when our inclusion ended. And they are anonymized summaries of euthanasia cases. And a key point here is that the RTEs, so the review committees, they don't publish every case, but they publish a selection of cases. And every case in which there is doubt about the fulfillment of these due care criteria of the Euthanasia Act. So in every case, there is doubt, that case summary is published. This fits the principles of purposive sampling, and one of the principles of qualitative research. So we included those case summaries, and we included 60 of them. So case summaries of people who received euthanasia based on dementia. And these were divided into 3 groups in order to cover the whole spectrum of decisional capacity. The first group consisted of cases of people who were decisionally incompetent and had an advance directive. The second group consisted of patients who were competent and had an advance directive. And lastly, in the third group, people did not have an advance directive and were decisionally competent. So what did we actually find? Well, in accordance with the guideline, we found that those 4 criteria of Applebaum and Grisot influence capacity assessment. The first of these criteria is the ability to communicate a choice, as I've already mentioned. And in many cases, this was explicitly mentioned, sometimes very clear cut. So if you look at the bottom left, is a quote from one of the reports. The patient asked the physician to perform the termination of life. Very clear cut communication of a choice. However, in some cases, this criterion came across with more ambiguity. For example, at the top right, the patient then looked at her intently and desperately. The consultant read, "Get me out of this," in her speaking eyes. So from this body language and from these eyes, communication about a choice is inferred. And this was the case with also the other criteria of Applebaum and Grisot, that sometimes they were more clear-cut. However, in some cases, they were more interpretative. Then we move on to the second criterion, which was the ability to understand relevant information. And the relevant information in these cases was whether patients understood dying, whether they understood the role of the physician or the meaning of their request. So for example, the patient was insufficiently decisionally competent to discriminate euthanasia from dying in a natural way. So the relevant information is, in this case, is whether the patient understands dying. The third criterion of Applebaum and Grisot is the ability to appreciate the situation and its consequences. And in these cases, this referred to whether patients understood their disease, whether they understood their situation in general, whether they understood the future, the consequences of their decision for euthanasia, and whether they understood time in general. An example here is the patient was not decisionally competent because she could not completely grasp the consequences of her desire and actions anymore. So she could not appreciate the consequences, therefore she was not decisionally competent. And then we end up with the fourth criterion of Applebaum and Grisot, which is the ability to manipulate information rationally, or as it's also phrased, the ability to reason logically. This was only present in a few cases. Sometimes the motivation for the request was also mentioned. Sometimes this was left out. For example, she did not want to wait for the moment she would have even more complaints, and she also did not want to risk becoming decisionally incompetent due to rapid deterioration. So this is an explanation of the reasoning behind the euthanasia request. And as you'll notice, in this reasoning, the patient also refers to the future. In many cases, this was the case. So people refer to the future when motivating their euthanasia request. And this demonstrates a co-occurrence of this fourth criterion of Applebaum and Grisot, and also the third criterion. As to refer to the future, you need to be able to appreciate and understand this future. And so we've looked at these 4 criteria of Applebaum and Grisot. And it should be noted that they were present to some extent in every case that we analyzed. However, they were mostly implicit. So rarely was it mentioned, these criteria of Applebaum and Grisot. Also, these criteria suggest that they are very clear-cut. However, they are dimensional, so there's a cutoff value. For example, at the bottom right, the patient was sporadically aware of her situation, so she partially conformed to this criteria. And if you look at the top left, quote, the physician actually did consider the patient to be decisionally competent regarding her request, despite the fact that the patient did not fulfill the Applebaum criteria. So this illustrates that apparently these criteria by Applebaum and Grisso were not the only factors that were taken into account when assessing decisional capacity. So what were those factors? Well, we identified 6 supporting factors that also influenced decisional capacity assessment. The first of which is the communicative ability of the patient. So, for example, the physician was, based on the visible verbal and non-verbal communication between the patient and loved ones, convinced that she had been decisionally competent. The second of these supporting factors is the presence of psychiatric comorbidity. For example, there were no psychiatric complaints or characteristics of a depressive disorder. The physician considered the patient to be decisionally competent regarding her request. So no psychiatric comorbidity, therefore decisionally competent. The third of these supporting factors is the personality of the patients, which was also a factor in capacity assessment in a number of cases. For example, the patient was considered decisionally competent based on the communications between the patient and loved ones and knowing her as a person. So the personality of the patient was included in this assessment of capacity. In some cases, the presence of an advanced directive also influenced capacity assessment. If you look at the quote, the consultant considered the patient to be, among other things, due to his advanced directive, decisionally competent, which illustrates how this also influenced capacity assessment. Then we arrive at the fifth supporting factor, which is the consistency of the request. Although this is not strictly one of the due care criteria, many physicians included in their judgment of capacity whether the request for euthanasia was expressed consistently. For example, at the top quotation, the consultant doubted the decisional competence regarding her present death wish. The patient could not consistently state the moment of euthanasia, so the request was inconsistent, and therefore there were doubts about decisional capacity. And in some cases, inconsistency of the request was used to disregard statements the patient made. For example, the physician did not regard the patient's inconsistent statements as expressions of her wish in the context of decisional competence. So the statements were inconsistent, therefore not regarded as expressions of a wish. And then we arrive at the sixth and last supporting factor, which is the relationship between the patient and the physician. For example, the physician acknowledges that it is very possible that people who did not know the patient well considered her to be decisionally incompetent. The consultant, so another physician, had not managed to establish good verbal contact. So in this case, the physician stated that knowing the patient well was necessary to accurately judge decisional capacity, which shows how this is also a factor in these assessments. So we've looked at those 4 criteria of Applebaum and Grisso. We've looked at those 6 supporting factors that all influence capacity assessment. In these cases, there were 2 additional factors that also had an influence. We call these the contextual factors. And these factors don't directly influence capacity assessment, but provide a context, a basis upon which this assessment takes place. And I'll illustrate now. So the first of these contextual factors are the characteristics of the professionals involved. For example, the notary himself has a responsibility and capacity for assessment of decisional competence. The physician had no reason to doubt the notary's expertise. So a physician included information from a notary about assessment of capacity. Also, in some cases, the characteristics of the professionals that were already involved influence whether physicians decided to consult another professional. For example, the patient was in a situation with so much expertise that consulting an external specialist was not necessary. The second contextual factor was the number of and the time in between the investigations that were carried out to assess this capacity. For example, based on long observation of the patient and conversations with her, the physician had noticed that the patient expressed her wish to die between the lines. So only through multiple conversations and long observation was this wish to die noticed, which illustrates how these contextual factors are the context upon which this assessment takes place. So we've looked at those 4 criteria of Appelbaum-Grisso. We've looked at those supporting factors and the contextual factors. This all culminates in the following framework. On the right side, I'll take you through it quickly. On the right side, you'll see decisional competence regarding the euthanasia request, and underneath that are the 4 criteria of Appelbaum-Grisso. So communicating a choice, understanding relevant information, the ability to appreciate the situation and consequences, and the ability to reason logically, to manipulate information. And these had a direct influence on capacity assessment. Additionally, those 6 supporting factors, so level of communication, psychiatric comorbidity, the personality of the patient, the advance directive, consistency of the euthanasia request, and the patient-physician relationship, had a direct effect on decisional capacity assessment, as demonstrated by the arrow to the right, but they also influence the thresholds of those 4 criteria of Appelbaum-Grisso. So they influenced when those criteria were considered to be met. And lastly, on the left side, you'll see those 2 contextual factors, the professionals involved and the investigations that were carried out, which provide the context upon which this assessment takes place. Briefly run by some methodological considerations. So main strengths of this study include its qualitative design and the large sample size, which allows for thorough analysis of this quite complicated process. And the main limitation of this study lies in the nature of these reports, as they are summaries of cases. And since they are summaries, it is possible that information relevant to decisional capacity assessment has been omitted from these reports. However, the review committee, so the RTE, have stated that they aim to contribute to the public debate about this topic, and that is why they publish these reports. And since decisional capacity is at the center of this debate, it seems probable that most information about this topic will be present in these reports. Also, the fact that we included a large number of cases and a large diversity of cases might also help to remedy this potential pitfall. Then we arrive at our conclusion, which is that assessment of decisional capacity in these dementia cases is complex, more complex than the guideline suggests. This highlights the need for more attention to this topic in training of physicians, and it also highlights the need for daily reflection upon this practice. So thank you for listening. If there are any questions, let me know.
So, Arne, thank you very much for this clear presentation about your study. Indeed, are there any questions for Arne from the audience? Richard.
Yes, yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Arne. I was wondering, you have read a lot of reports of the euthanasia committee and about dementia. And in dementia, it is complex because we know at a certain moment people will lose capacity. And it is also often that people want to live as long as they have capacity. So it's always a difficult border. But maybe you have also, do you think that the same complexity also applies to patients with a psychiatric disorder? Or do you think the decisional capacity is much easier when it comes to a psychiatric disorder?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It is a good question. So obviously, there are differences between dementia and psychiatric disorders. I'm not 100% sure about this answer, but I think that the nature of dementia leads to certain worsening of decisional capacity. So sort of the line goes down consistently. And within a psychiatric disorder, decisional capacity can fluctuate more. So I think there will be differences in that. It can be possible that a person who is at one point incompetent with a psychiatric disorder might become competent again. While within dementia, of course, capacity fluctuates too. However, the overarching process will be deterioration. So I think in that timeline there will be differences, and therefore these processes cannot be placed upon psychiatric patients like one-on-one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Arno? Kenneth?
Yes, thank you. I hope not just the executive board can ask questions, so everyone's allowed to ask them. But yeah, I was thinking about the situation in Belgium with, of course, also the need to report your euthanasia case. And I think that in the Netherlands, there is more due diligence, let's say, in terms of completing these forms. But I still had the question, do you think that you had comprehensive information to for every case to base your research on as a method, or do you think there might still be missing pieces or missing information that would give even more weight to your analysis? Because I think if we were to do this type of research in Belgium, we would probably have, even if we got access to these reports, we would probably run into the problem of these forms not being completed as well enough to distill this kind of information.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think possibly yes. So one of the main flaws of the Dutch system is that it relies on reporting of information by physicians. So it is probable that in some cases, I think information that we would have considered relevant to assessment of decisional capacity will not be present in the reporting by the physicians and will also not be present in these case summaries by the RTE, by the review committees. However, we in the cases I've read, especially the cases that happened earlier, I think the review committees tend to really focus on this aspect of capacity in these dementia cases, and they are also quick to invite a physician for additional information if they have questions about this capacity assessment. So I think that will potentially remedy this potential shortage of information, that the euthanasia review committees were very quick to request additional information because they were so focused on this topic. So I think potentially, yeah, relevant information could not be present, but also the procedure that the euthanasia review committees use to judge these cases might also help to decrease this potential loss of information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but still, your research is based on the summaries of the total reports by the RTE, so might be missing. And do you? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I have a question, Cisco. I will follow you, but do you have any idea how we can do it better, the research? Because the research is now based on the summaries of reports of the RTE. Do you have any idea to study this topic of decisional capacity and dementia better, or do you have any ideas about it?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be preferred if we had access to the full files of these patients and the full documents that were provided to the review committees, which leaves out the problem of these cases being case summaries. In addition to that, I think it'd also be interesting to look at this assessment in real time. So set up a study around that and follow physicians. However, of course, that is more taxing and more intensive than analyzing these reports. I think that'd be potential avenues to explore.
Yeah, thank you. Cisco van Veen, please, if you have a question, introduce yourself shortly, if it's possible.
Okay, I'm Cisco. I'm also a geriatric psychiatrist from the Netherlands. Thanks for your talk, Arne. I have one small comment, and apart from that, I learned a lot. I think it's good to consequently call it advanced requests and not advanced directives, because you're not directing anything. The doctor, the physician, has to make his own assessment. And in practice, we see that a lot of doctors aren't willing to follow advanced requests. So that it's pretty rare, made for advanced dementia. So that's just a comment, and for the rest, compliments for your good work. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Cisco, for the comment. It's quite rare indeed. I thought in 2023 there were 6 or 8 cases. 8 cases. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think so. But you can't direct anything. It's not a right. You can't force a doctor to do it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Thank you very much for this comment. Richard.
Thank you. I'd like to add one issue about the methodological issues, about the completeness of the reports. We have indeed in this kind of research to rely on the reports, and they will not always completely include all the details, but in qualitative research, you're trying to build a framework. So you hope that all aspects will be mentioned in one or more reports, but if it's missing in some reports, it's no issue. The problem is, and that we see some colleagues from countries outside the Netherlands, if you use these reports in a quantitative way and you are going to think our criteria met, or then it will be a serious mistake that you can't be sure that everything you want to count is really reported. So then it may sometimes suggest that it is not a good procedure in the Netherlands, but I think that's an important part. But I think that issue does not count for the way Arne has analyzed his outcome and results. So I just wanted to add it.
Thank you for the comments. Okay, are there any other questions or comments? I don't see. So thank you very much, Arne, for this excellent presentation. And then we'll go further, Lisanne, to the next presenter. Let me see if I can share my presentation shortly. Yeah, this was Arne. Now we go further with a presentation of Lisanne Sweren. Lisanne is a senior researcher from at 113 Suicide Prevention. That's the National Organization for Suicide Prevention in the Netherlands. And as a principal investigator, PI, Lisanne coordinates several quite huge studies on suicide prevention in mental health care settings and on suicidality and persistent death wishes among people with severe psychiatric illnesses. And she has published with her research group an excellent paper in the JAMA Psychiatry in January of this year about a request for medical assistance in dying by young Dutch people with psychiatric disorders. So I'm very proud that she will present her paper and research here. I stop this, so Lisanne, you can share your presentation and the floor is yours. Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. And does it also click through now?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it's okay. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yes, thank you, Radboud, for this very kind introduction. I'm going to tell you indeed about the paper that Radboud just introduced that was published in JAMA. But before, and there will be a lot of numbers in this paper, but before I start talking about numbers, I would like to show you a picture of my friend Rowan, who died by euthanasia in 2013. And she's an important motivator for the research I do, because at some point in life we were very similar, and now I'm here and she's no longer with us. So it's something that I always keep in mind, and I have a lot of questions about, obviously, that I'm trying to answer with research, among others. So I just wanted to show you this picture before we start. Now let's get going on the numbers then. Young people requesting medical assistance in dying for psychiatric disorders, and MADE-PS is the abbreviation that we're using throughout the paper and that I will also be using in this presentation. So in the Netherlands, there was quite clearly a period in time where there was a lot of media attention for young people requesting medical assistance in dying with psychiatric complaints or based on psychiatric suffering. There were a lot of stories of people who died by MADE-PS in this quite recently, young people too. But there were also some stories about people who told their story who were requesting euthanasia or MADE-PS at some point and then recovered. So I think it's good to see both stories represented in the press. However, at the moment, it's not yet very balanced. I think it's clear that the stories on the left side where people in the end died by euthanasia are more prevalent than the recovery stories. While in reality, looking at the numbers, this is not reflective of what's really going on. Because if you look at these numbers, these are the numbers of euthanasia requests and the number of times euthanasia was performed. In the Netherlands, this is for all ages. We see that the number increases indeed, both the number of requests increases and the number of deaths increases. However, the number of requests is a lot higher than the number of deaths, suggesting that about 90% of people who request euthanasia or medical assistance in dying will not receive this procedure. So we were interested to see how these numbers translated to young people, because young people are much more in the spotlight recently and also generate a lot more debate among clinicians, among clinicians and in society in general. Oh, I think I just stopped sharing. No, I just stopped presenting. Do you see my slides again?
Yeah, we see the slides, but not the presentation. Yeah.
Not in presentation mode?
The full presentation. You
That's
see only
strange.
small slides now.
Okay, that's strange. I will share again. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How about now?
Now it's okay.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so the research questions we had was the first question was quite simple on the number of MADE-PS requests among young people in the Netherlands and how that changed in recent years. Basically, the figure you just saw for all MADE-PS requests of all ages, but now specified for young people. A second research question we had was about the outcomes of young people requesting euthanasia or medical assistance in dying, especially the gap between the people who requested and the people who died by euthanasia. And then for the people who died, we wanted to gain more insight, the young people who died, we wanted to gain more insight into their clinical characteristics. And we could look at only the people who died, and that's the people who died by either euthanasia or MADE-PS, and by the people who died by suicide during the application. And I will explain in a short while why we looked at these two groups. So the contents of the paper are available now online. You can find it through this QR code, or you can just Google it. It's quite easily findable. So we did a retrospective observational study based on medical files. These are the medical files of the Dutch National Expertise Center on Euthanasia, that Expertise Centrum Euthanasie. In the period that we investigated, so starting in 2013 until 2022, the majority of euthanasias based on psychiatric grounds were performed in this center, mostly due to the complexity We don't have the exact numbers, but it's at least 50%. So we included all the made-PS requests that occurred at the Expertise Center for Euthanasia, abbreviated EE, between the 1st of 2012 and the first half of 2021. Inclusion criteria were that the request had to be made when the patient was 24 years or younger at application. The primary ground for the application had to be psychiatric suffering, and we needed the file to be closed at our index date, which was the 1st of December 2012 when we started this research, because we wanted to look at outcomes. So we then need only the closed, we can use only the closed files. This resulted in 2 data sets, one large data set of almost 400 applications. And of this large data set, we had very little information. So we only knew of these people, their application dates, the closure, when the file was closed and what the outcome was, and sex and age at application. So this is a large set. And then there was a small data set of the deceased individuals. We had much more information on these individuals because we could look at their files without ethical concerns, basically. We did an application for ethical approval to look at their files. And for the people who were deceased, we were allowed to actually have a look in their files, or the researchers were allowed to have a look in their files. And for the people who did not die during the process, we did not have this permission. So that's why we have these 2 data sets. And during the process, almost 30 participants died. So the data set of people with a lot of information is 29 people. So first, I will share shortly with you what the usual process of care is at the Expertise Center for Euthanasia. So that after this slide, I can show you how we wanted to investigate how people moved through this workflow, let's say, and where they stopped following the process, or where they were in the process when they died, if they died, or when an outcome occurred. So first, there's the initial application where people can themselves or their physician can sign up basically online, or they can do it by paper, and they fill in a very lengthy application form. That's the initial application. Next, they need to complete their application, and the most important thing to do to complete their application is provide medical information. So they need to go to their doctor and ask medical information and send it to the Expertise Center, or they need to ask their doctor to send it to the Expertise Center. This is quite a big step for patients, because those medical files of these patients are often very lengthy, and they often need multiple doctors to send in the files. Then, after the application is complete, there will be an initial screening of the application. This is done by either a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse. The exact procedure differed a bit during the time of our study, because the Expertise Center evolved too in this period of 10 years, of course. But basically, there is an initial screening, sometimes on paper, sometimes people were asked to come to an interview with a psychiatrist, for instance, or with a nurse. And then there was a preliminary decision. After the initial screening, there's a full assessment phase where a team is assigned to the patient, to the applicant, and there's a full assessment of all the criteria that are documented in the law. And finally, after this stage, there's a made-PS can be administered or processed. So at these stages of screening and assessment, applications can be denied or rejected. And then that's one way out of this workflow. And the other way out of the workflow, of course, is when people withdraw their application. And we were especially interested also in this side of the workflow, as we wanted to see at which stage people withdraw and what happens next. So first, I'll show you the results of the numbers. So these are the numbers of applications of people aged 24 and younger. The black line is the number of applications we included. However, you can see as the further you go in the years, there's a larger number of applications that were not yet closed. So I also showed these to get a better representative image of how the number of applications developed. So either line shows that there's a clear increase in the number of applications by young people. These are the deaths that occurred during the study periods. There's no clear increase or decrease to be seen here, although 2021 we see only the first half of the year, but these numbers are also very low. So these numbers are so low that actual statistics on an increase or a decrease are not valuable. So here, this is the picture that was the main outcome of our study, and I will talk you through it because it's quite a lot. So in the green column, you can see the procedure that I just described from initial request to the MAID PS. And you can see the different stages of the process. And again, on the right, you can see where the people were rejected. And on the left, you can see the people who dropped out. So the first thing I'd like you to see is that of the initial almost 400 requests, the number of people who died by MAID was 12. So this is a very low number among those 400 applications. The second thing I'd like you to see, The second thing I'd like you to see is that the number of rejections and the number of discontinuations were about equal. So of all the people who did not die by MAID PS or suicide also, about half of them was rejected and about half of them discontinued on their own account. Second thing I wanted to show you is the discontinuation and rejection often occurred very early. So for the people who were rejected, almost all of them were rejected at the very early stage, in the initial screening stage. And then of the people who withdrew, almost all of them withdrew very shortly after the initial application by not completing their medical file. So they did not complete their file, and then at some point the file is closed and your application is closed. And the third thing I'd like to show you is the suicides that we were particularly interested in. We wanted to see when they occurred during the process, and what we found is that they occur at different stages, basically. There's not one stage at which all the suicides occur. They occur from the beginning to the end, with some people even dying by suicide shortly after they had already been given permission for MAID or euthanasia, and then still they couldn't hang in there. Let's say they couldn't make it to the euthanasia date, and they died by suicide, even though they knew that the day of their death was planned already. At the other end of the spectrum, there was one person who died one day after submitting the initial application, for instance. So it's a very wide spectrum. They seem to occur at all stages. So looking at the clinical characteristics of the people who died by euthanasia or MAID PS, here we are making a distinction between the people who died by euthanasia and the people who died by suicide. Both of the groups are very small, so we cannot compare them. They're too small to compare. But they're also, it would also not be fair to describe them together because we think they're different groups. So I'm just describing both of the groups, and then I will draw some inferences about how they are similar or dissimilar, but this is not a statistical comparison we could do. So of the people who died by MAID, by euthanasia, that was 12 people. I think most importantly, the clinical profile of these people was very similar to what we know from the literature about adults. They were mostly female. In fact, all the applicants were also mostly female. So this is a representation of the applicants, but these two were mostly female. The most frequent, they had many diagnoses, a median of 4, but some people up to 8. Most frequent diagnoses were autism spectrum disorder, major depressive disorders, eating disorders, personality disorders, and trauma-related disorders. And then looking at suicidality, which was also something we are particularly interested in, we saw that 100% of the people who died eventually by euthanasia had a current or past history of suicidality, including suicidal behavior. And 11 had made multiple suicide attempts prior to the day they died by MAID. And 9, so 75%, also had a history of self-harm. Looking at treatment history, which is quite new in this study, compared to previous studies, it's usually they describe the diagnostic history, but not so much the treatment history. So we did have a chance also to look at the treatment history. These people had very extensive treatment histories. These are the 12 people who died by MAPS again. On average, they had 11.5 unique psychoactive medications, including many antidepressants, but also antipsychotics, anti-anxiety medication, sleep medication, quite a wide range of medications they had tried. They had tried quite intensive treatment options as well, like inpatient treatment, neuromodulatory treatment, for instance. Quite a lot had tried that as well. That includes ECT or DBS, deep brain stimulation, and intensive home treatment. Many had tried recovery-oriented treatment as well, although we didn't have a very sharp definition of this type of treatment. But yeah, based on our criteria, we found that quite a lot had indeed tried this. And then treatment-related experiences, 100% had experienced involuntary treatment measures. These could range from involuntary feeding and eating disorder treatments, for instance, but also involuntary admission to a hospital. And crisis-related hospital admissions, which is likely to be associated with the suicidality that we've seen in the previous slides. Then looking at the suicide group, there were 17 of them. One person, that's the person who died on the day after the initial application, we do not have any information on, so this is included, but this is missing in terms of diagnoses. Also, missing data is a bigger issue in the suicide group in general because they died before their application was complete, or they died during the process and not all diagnoses, for instance, had already been reported. However, we see a quite similar picture to the euthanasia group, where they have many diagnoses. The list of most frequent diagnoses is actually the same, but in a different order. It's almost the same, but in a different order. But the most frequent diagnoses seem to be similar. And also a lot of suicidality, both current and past, and a lot of self-harm. In terms of treatment history, we had little information on this group, but we did see that there was a lot of crisis-related hospital admission and a lot of antidepressant and other psychoactive medication treatment that was tried. So onto the interpretation. We see a clinical profile of these young people who died by MAPS or died by suicide during the process. That is largely in line with the literature on adults, so depression, autism, and trauma-related disorders, personality disorders, and eating disorders are highly prevalent. In this young group, we do see also a prominent suicidality. In the literature on adults, suicidality is usually around 50%. The literature on adults is very limited, so it's the question. Yeah, it's a question of whether this comparison is actually a valid comparison. But in our group, it's 100%. So the difference does seem to be a very striking, prominent feature in this group. And we see very extensive treatment histories. Importantly, I'd like to point out that this information is all about the 29 people who died, and we do not know if they are representative of the 400 applications that were initially submitted. So this is only about the people who died. And there's a missing data in the suicide group that we should keep in mind. The treatment histories might have been more extensive than we saw in this study. Importantly, some other limitations that I'd like to point out. Firstly, we only included the suicides that occurred during the application process, which means that after a file was closed, we could no longer register a suicide if it did occur. So suicides related to rejection, for instance, we were not able to capture those because mostly these are not, they can be reported in the file, in the patient file at the expertise center, but they might also not be reported in the patient file in the expertise center because their patient file is then closed. So these we couldn't investigate, and we're looking forward to investigating that in another study that we're currently running. And another one, a limitation, is that this study included all the patients from the expertise center for euthanasia, but the expertise center is not a is a national expertise center, but it's not the only organization that might handle MAPS requests. People can apply for MAPS at their own GP or at the psychiatrist, their own psychiatrist. In the time frame that we're talking about, 2012 to 2021, a lot of applications were processed by the expertise center, but we don't have the exact numbers to get to a national to national numbers. So what I'd like you to remember from today's presentation, the most likely outcome of a made PS request by a young person is that they will withdraw their application, followed by rejected. And combined, these two groups are about 90% of all applications. And usually this occurs early on in the procedure. 3% of all applicants died by euthanasia, and 4.3% resulted in suicide at some point during the process. So we conclude that the risk of suicide is high in this group. It's higher than any other group, high-risk group I know. The clinical profile of those who die by suicide or euthanasia is similar to that described by adults, although suicidality might be more prominent in this younger group. And we also conclude that there is an urgent need for suicide prevention strategies among this group of people who request medical aid in dying, especially when they're young. So just briefly, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Sunset study. That is a current study, that is a study I just referred to as the ongoing study now. It's a cohort study that we started 2 years ago, I think. Again, together with the Expertise Center for Euthanasia. And in that study, we include all patients who apply prospectively. So all patients who apply for euthanasia based on psychiatric suffering are sent a request to participate in our study. And if they do, they are sent questionnaires. And we now have 2 measurement points, one measurement point right after application, and then 6 months later, we ask them to participate again. We're looking to Of course, we're looking to add measurements, because after 6 months is relatively short in a procedure that might take up to multiple years. So we really want to know how they're doing really, and get a broader image of what their life looks like after euthanasia application, because the chances are 90%, we think, that they are still alive after a few years. So this is an exciting study. It's also a difficult study because there's not that many applicants. So we need to be very patient to include our to get to the targets that we set for ourselves for inclusion. So we're just going steady, reaching our inclusion goals. But this is going to be a while before we are able to present results. I'd like to thank the team on this study. Apart from myself, there's Sanne from the GGZ Oost-Brabant, the Mental Healthcare Institute for Young People. There's Leah and Monique, who did all the data extraction of the patient files, which was not only difficult, but also quite emotionally challenging, I would say. This is difficult material. Cisco, who has been a great co-leader of the work together with Dan, and my other colleagues Saskia, Ruti, and Julian, who provided a lot of input on clinical profiles. If you have any questions, do send me an email.
Thank you very much, Lisanne, for this personal and scientific presentation. Are there any questions for Lisanne? Richard?
Yeah, very interesting and good presentation, Lisanne. Very impressive research you are doing. I was wondering, if you look at the figures, you see high levels of suicidality in the past of these patients in both groups. And if you speak with clinicians who are a little bit reluctant to perform euthanasia, or they sometimes have the argument that it's very difficult to make a distinction between suicidality or chronic suicidality and a rational death wish. While from my perspective as a clinician, but I work mainly with older people, even people who are suicidal can very good argue about their death wish independent of their suicidality. And I was wondering, when I look at these data, do you think that that distinction becomes much more difficult when it concerns younger people, or do you think they can also make the distinction very clear themselves? Do you have any ideas about that?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and one question I've been struggling with as well when interpreting these data. I do think you're right to say that for young people it's more difficult. I can imagine looking at suicidality, we know, for instance, that it comes and goes and it fluctuates. And if you're very young and you haven't been through those flows yet, you might not be able to recognize this. So I do see that this might be a valid point. However, the problem with this study is that we couldn't ask them. We only had the files. So in our case, it was actually rather easy to make the distinction because we just looked at the file, and if it said suicide attempt, there's a suicide attempt.
Yeah.
So I would love to investigate this further by talking to young patients. Actually, we have talked to older, not elderly patients, but just any age patient, a group of any age patients with persistent death wishes in a previous study, and there we did see the same thing you're describing, where they could quite clearly make the distinction between the more crisis-y suicidality that they would experience from time to time and the persistent, more rational death wish that might be present all the time.
Yeah.
I'm curious to discuss this with young people who experience it.
Yeah, I think important topic, I think, for further research and to think about. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Lisanne at this moment? Marcel, please introduce yourself shortly.
My name is Marcel Menne. I do mainly voluntary work in some organizations in the mental health care domain as a father of a girl who committed suicide 3 years ago. I wonder, Lisanne, what kind of lessons can you draw from this study? Are we doing it? What should we do better in mental health care or policy, or shouldn't we? Maybe, if you look at these numbers and well, the conclusions you can draw from them.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. In terms of lessons for mental health care, based on the patient files, there's not that much we can say because we can only say what they did and what they tried, but we do not know if this was matching to their needs, for instance, or if they tried it sufficiently, or if how they went about this kind of treatment. So we cannot say much about that. What I do think we can learn here is that for young people, there's a large group of young people who expresses a wish for euthanasia and or made PS who will not be eligible. And I wonder whether these people should really be expressing a wish for made PS or should just, or do they really want to just talk about their death wish? So do we really need to express a wish for euthanasia in order to be taken seriously to talk about our death wish if you're a young person? Because I think a lot of people who are young and have a death wish feel they can not really talk about it with their primary physician, so they turn to the expertise center, for instance. Whereas if they were able to talk about it earlier or in a different way, rather than with suicidality, there's always the safety concern, so you make a safety plan, etc. Very practical. But I wonder if there's a different way to talk to young people in healthcare about their death wish that will, in fact, be helpful to them, if that makes sense, because most of them will not die by euthanasia. So we do need to think about all the others and what we can offer them to relieve their pain, basically, to relieve and also to relieve their death wish, if we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lisanne. Any other questions or comments about this? No, I was wondering, Lisanne, because last year in the Netherlands there was a huge debate in the media about this group, and shortly after that you published with your group this publication. Did you have any reactions or comments about the study, or?
Not too much. No, we did get quite some media attention, but I think the strong point of this paper is that it's quite objective. It's numbers, so that helps us because I think the discussion so far in the media and beyond in the society at large has been based not on numbers, but more on feelings or on case or anecdotes or case series, for instance. So I think there was a real need for numbers. And now we have a few numbers at least. We have a first start in terms of numbers. So, and we noticed that in that way it was well received by all parties actually in the debate.
Okay, thank you. Last question for Stephanie Crawford.
Hello, everyone. I'm calling from Northern Ireland. So this isn't something that is normal back here. So maybe my question isn't something you can answer, I'm not sure. But I'm just wondering about the people you said who were rejected. Like, is there any research on how they felt about the rejection or how that, is it a relief or are they angry about it? Is there anything that you can tell me about that?
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah, thank you for the question and also for asking a question, even if you're not from a country where this is permitted, because I think this is the nice part of this platform, right? To exchange between countries with different experiences. So we did it in our study. We are currently doing this study on the Sunset study that I just showed, but that'll be a while before we get results. There is some work on on follow-ups after rejection. It's not that much, but there is some work. And the work I've seen so far was on adults, and there they show that the majority of adults had a persistent death wish even after their rejection. So the death wish mostly persisted. But how this is in young people, that's up for debate. I hope to answer that in a few years with the Sunset study. But maybe someone else of the group might also know of other studies that show something else.
No, just this. Oh, Kenneth.
Yes, well, we also did some research with patients in Flanders, where this is, of course, also a possibility. And yes, there are varying reactions to a rejection, let's say, although most of the patients also in our study withdrew themselves their request. So a hard no doesn't actually occur that often. It's mostly in conversation with the physician that they come to the conclusion that they will, reattempt some treatment or do something else to try to move away from this tunnel vision of the death track, let's say. And when we interviewed patients, the thing that came up the most in terms of reaction to a rejected request is the amount of explanation they receive from their physician in terms of if it's explained well by the physician, relating it to the legal criteria and also relating it to the personal and treatment history of that person, then they can really understand the rejection, and it helps them to cope with this negative message, let's say. And others react quite badly to it because they are very fixated on this on this wish to die, and so yes, you get this variation of reactions. I can share this publication. It was published also. It was one of the studies done by Monica Verhofstadt.
Okay, thank you very much for this comment and for the question, Stephanie. So we have only 5 minutes to go for this first meeting. Let me see if I can go back to my presentation. Thank you very much, Lisanne, for this very good presentation. And what you said is excellent, because we also want to exchange opinions and research all over the country. So thank you for that comment. We are planning to, we have planned new network meetings in 2025. In June will be the first one, 20th of June. And we've decided to plan the network meetings on 2 o'clock Central European time. So also the colleagues from Canada and Australia can join these meetings. The meetings are free this year. Next year we will ask a small contribution for being a member of the IAADM. And we are asking you to spread news about our IAADM. I have to get used to it because in Dutch is IAADM. We're talking all the time about IAADM, and now it's IAADM. And please join us. Please send us any ideas, topics, ideas for presentations, about the situation in your country, research, clinical care, and please consider to become a member of the advisory board of IAADM. And let us know that at our email info@iaadm.org. So this was the first meeting. I'm curious about the countries that have visited this meeting. So I see people from Belgium, Northern Ireland, the Netherlands, Spain. Are there any other nationalities, or is these 4 countries are the representatives for now? Is it okay or not? Yes. Any comments from you to this first meeting of comments on the foundation of this association? Not still so far. So please, I hope to see you in the next online meeting in June. For now, thank you for attending this meeting and hope to see you soon. And thank you very much, Arne and Lisa. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.